All right, so we are starting today with Book 4, Discourse 9. So last time we had just started the story of Dhruva. And we got to where Dhruva, still just 5 years old as a child, was doing intense tapasya and sadhana on Vasudeva, and identified himself with the whole of the universe enough that as he was practicing intense pranayama and restraining his breath, he started to restrain the breath of the whole universe through identification with it, enough that he had compelled Vasudeva to go and intervene. So, Discourse 9, Dhruva returns home after receiving a boon from the Lord. Maitreya went on, Maitreya, of course, being the one who's narrating. Thus rid of their fear, the gods bent their heads low to the Lord, who took very long strides. It essentially used the name of the Lord, meaning long strider, or so on, referring to the Vamana avatar. And they returned to heaven. The Lord, who in his cosmic form appears with numberless heads, also thereupon flew on the back of Garuda to Madhuvana with a longing to see his devotee. Madhuvana is the forest where Dhruva was doing his sadhana. Later on, at this time, it was just a jungle, but later on, it's going to be the site of the city Mathura. The word Madhuvana actually, over the course of the ages, became the name Mathura, the same name of the place. It kind of was a contraction of Madhuvana. Dhruva saw that the form, brilliant as a flash of lightning, that was revealed in the lotus of his heart by an intellect sharpened by the ripeness of yoga, had suddenly vanished. So he had been, with his eyes closed, intensely visualizing the form of the Lord in his heart. Suddenly it vanished, and his meditation was disturbed. And on opening his eyes, he beheld the same figure standing outside him. Struck with awe at his sight, the child Dhruva greeted him by prostrating his body like a log on the ground. He gazed at him as if he would drink him with his eyes, kiss him with his lips, and clasp him with his arms. Srihari, who is enthroned in the heart of all, and was present in that of Dhruva too, perceived that the child was eager to extol him, but knew not how to do it, and stood with joined palms. So he was like, I think this is a very kind of relatable reaction to if Srihari appeared in bodily form in front of you, that you would want to start praising him and somehow but wouldn't find the words, just stood there silently with his palms joined. Hence he graciously touched his cheek with his conch, which is no other than Veda. Instantly blessed with divine speech conferred, and having realized the truth of the individual soul as well as of the Supreme Spirit, Dhruva, who was destined to have an eternal abode, calmly and devoutly proceeded to glorify the Lord, whose great renown is universally known. Dhruva said, "Hail to you, the glorious person, the wielder of all potencies, who having entered my inner self, awaken by your glory my dormant speech and other organs, such as hands, feet, ears, the tactile sense, and so on. It is you alone, O Lord, who having evolved the Mahattattva and all these other phenomena by your own potency called Maya, consisting of the three gunas, which are capable of assuming multitudinous forms, enter them as their inner controller, and presiding over the illusory senses, appear as many, though really one, even though fire appears diversified in relation to different pieces of wood." In other words, that there are many fires, but all of them are the same Agni Tattva. Through the vision conferred by you, O Lord, Brahma viewed this universe like one who has just woke from sleep. How can the soles of your feet, the resort of even liberated souls, be forgotten by him who is conscious of your benevolent acts, O friend of the afflicted? Their mind has surely been beguiled by your Maya, who worship you, a veritable wish-yielding tree, capable of freeing one from birth and death. For other purposes, their mind has surely been beguiled by your Maya, who worship you, a veritable wish-yielding tree capable of freeing one from birth and death, who worship you for other purposes and hanker after the pleasures of sense, enjoyable by the body, and which can be had by living beings, even in hell. So even in the Narakas, there are some sensory pleasures to be had. The bliss which is enjoyed by embodied souls through meditation on your lotus feet, or by hearing the stories of your devotees, is not found even in Brahman, who is blissful in essence. How then could it be enjoyed by them who are hurled from the aerial cars, smashed by the sword of death? May I enjoy the intimate fellowship, O infinite Lord, of exalted souls possessed of a pure heart and constantly devoted to you, so that I may easily cross the terrible ocean of metempsychosis, meaning of samsara, of reincarnation, full of great perils, drunk with the nectar of your virtues and stories. Andy, I see. Yeah, it's the one entitled Dhruva returns home after receiving a boon from the Lord. Interesting. Yeah, it is book 4, discourse 9. I'm not sure what page it is in the online version. In my version, I haven't been following along in that one. In this copy, it's page 333. They who have cultivated the close fellowship of men, whose heart is captivated with the fragrance of your lotus feet, O Lord, with a lotus sprung from your navel, think no more of their mortal frame, which is extremely dear to all, much less of those connected with it, like their children, relations, house, wealth, wife, so on. O birthless one, I know only your grossest form, full of animals, trees, and mountains, birds, reptiles, gods and demons and human beings, consisting of gross and subtle elements and brought about by many causes, such as the Mahatattva and so on. I am not aware, O Supreme Lord, of your other self higher than this, which transcends all speech. You are the same as the Supreme Person, who at the end of a cycle reposes with none beside him save Lord Ananta, and on his very coil, withdrawing all this universe into his belly, and with his eyes turned inward. Nay, it is in the seed vessel of the gold lotus representing all the 14 worlds, and sprung from the ocean of your navel, that the shining Brahma appears. I bow to that, Lord. You are the eternally free, all pure and all-knowing self, the immutable, most ancient person, possessed of all divine attributes and the controller of the three gunas. Witnessing by your unobstructed vision the different states of the mind, you appear as Vishnu for the preservation and are altogether distinct. It is in you that the manifold potencies of opposite character, namely Vidya and so on, constantly appear in unbroken succession, like the opposite, of course, being Vidya, Avidya, knowledge and ignorance, and so on. You are no other than Brahman, the cause of the universe, indivisible, without beginning or end, purely blissful in character and changeless. I take refuge in you. In the eyes of him who constantly adores you as an embodiment of supreme bliss, your lotus feet, O Lord, are the only true blessing as compared with other boons. Nevertheless, my master, just as a cow that has recently calved nourishes its calf and protects it, you foster even wretched devotees like us, impatient as you are to shower your grace on them. Maitreya resumed. Thus extolled by that sagacious child who cherished a noble purpose, the Lord, who is fond of his devotees, cheerfully received its praises and spoke as follows. The Lord said, I know the cherished desire of your heart, O Kshatriya boy. He's referring to him as Kshatriya boy because it relates to the cherished desire of his heart, which is to basically to win a seat of renown, such that his father's second wife taunted him for lacking. Although it is difficult to attain, I grant it, O child of commendable vow. May prosperity wait on you. I bestow on you, O blessed one, that effulgent and lasting abode which has not been attained to by others. The entire stellar sphere, consisting of planets, lunar mansions, and stars, stands fastened to it, even as oxen employed in trampling corn are bound to a post in the middle of a threshing floor. So this is actually a really specific celestial simile here. So the idea with oxen here, if you're plowing a small field, like some private farmer's home plot, and they have like one ox. A technique that they would use is they would to thresh grain, like to thresh rice. They'd have a threshing ground. I've seen people doing this in villages up in North India still, where they have a post in the center that they tie an ox to, and they'll throw in whatever's going to be threshed, like raw rice stalks or other crops. And the ox will walk a circle around it, basically at the furthest reach of the rope, which they keep short, and the ox will stamp on it. And so what the seat that Dhruva is being given here is the pole star, the North Star. And the whole wheel of the sky appears to circle around the pole star exactly as an ox around the threshing post. It survives even those who live for a whole day of Brahma, even after the dissolution of the three worlds, since, of course, the life of stars is much longer. Nay, the stars presided over by Dharma, as in the god, Dharma Deva, Agni, Kashyapa Prajapati, and the Saptarishis, Shukra, and other stars too revolve around it, ever keeping it to their right. Since, of course, if you're in the northern hemisphere looking up, the rotation of the sky is clockwise around the pole star. When your father retires to the forest after handing over the earth, you will rule over the globe for a period of 36,000 years, firmly established in righteousness and with your senses unimpaired. Again, when your half-brother Uttama loses his life in a hunting expedition, his mother will enter a forest fire while searching for him in the forest, he being the only subject of her thought. Yajna is my beloved form. Therefore, worshipping me through a number of sacrifices, in which liberal fees will be paid to the officiating priests, and having enjoyed true blessings in this life, you will ultimately fix your thought on me. Thereby you will ascend to my abode, which is adored by all other spheres and is situated even higher than the Saptarishis, meaning, in this case, the constellation of the Saptarishis, what in the Western tradition is called the Ursa Major, or the Great Bear, attaining to which one does not return. Maitreya continued. Thus glorified, and having promised him his own realm, the Lord, who bears the emblem of Garuda on his banner, rose to his own abode while the child stood gazing in wonder. The child was not very pleased, even after attaining his cherished object, which had been obtained through the worship of Lord Vishnu's feet and had quenched his desires, and returned to the city. So Vidura here speaks up, says, how is it that Dhruva felt as if he had not realized his object, even though he had secured in the course of a single life the supreme abode of Srihari, the Lord of Maya, which is so very difficult to attain and is earned solely through the worship of his feet? Maitreya replied, his heart having been pierced with the shaft-like words of his stepmother and their memory still fresh, Dhruva did not seek mukti even from the Lord of Mukti. That is why he was filled with remorse when the bitterness was gone through the sight of the Lord. Dhruva said, even after securing in the course of 6 months the asylum of his feet, whose truth perpetual celibates like Sanandana have been able to realize through abstract meditation practiced through many lives, I have receded from them, my mind being fixed on diversity. Oh, look at my folly, alas, how unfortunate I am that, having reached the soles of his feet, who is capable of ending the cycle of birth and death, I asked for something which is bound to perish. My judgment was perverted by the gods, who could not bear to see my rare good fortune, inasmuch as they are sure to fall one day from their position. That is why I refused to believe the true words of Narada, most wicked that I am. Clinging to the Lord's Maya, and taking a perverted view of things, I, burnt with jealousy, mistaking my own brother for an enemy, although there is none other than me, just as a sleeping man sees the projection of his own self in the form of a lion, snake, and so on, and gets afraid of the same. Since, of course, whatever you see in a dream that you might be afraid of is just a projection of your own mind. Like medical treatment in the case of one whose life has come to an end, I asked in vain for this sovereignty of the world. It's like asking for medicine for someone who has already died. Having propitiated through austere penance the soul of the universe, who is difficult to please and is capable of ending the cycle of birth and death, I asked of him only worldly fortune, Hapless that I am. Alas, like a pauper seeking unhusked grains of a universal monarch, I, whose stock of merit had been depleted, foolishly asked for worldly power and pelf that tends to swell one's pride at the hands of him who was ready to grant me the joy that constitutes one's own essence. It is, I think, rather charming to keep in mind that the person saying this to himself is a 5-year-old boy, kind of stamping angrily through the woods. Although it's true, he did miss an infinitely greater opportunity because of his attachments. Maitreya began again. People like you, he's saying to Vidura, who take delight in the dust of the lotus feet of Lord Sri Krishna, the bestower of liberation, and whose mind remains sated with whatever is got without any effort, seek nothing for themselves beyond the privilege of serving him. When the king Uttanapada heard that his son was coming back, he did not give credence to the news, any more than one would believe the story of anyone's returning to life after death. And he said to himself, how could a wretched being like me have such good luck? He, however, put faith in the words of the celestial sage, the Devarishi Narada, and was overwhelmed with intensity of joy. So when Narada told him, he knew that that was a reliable source. Highly pleased with the man who had brought the news, he rewarded him with a costly pearl necklace. Eager to see his son, he mounted a car decked with gold and drawn by excellent horses, and surrounded by Brahmanas, the elders of his race, ministers and kinsfolk, sallied forth from the city. While conches were being blown and kettle drums sounded, Vedic hymns were loudly chanted and flutes played upon. Adorned with gold ornaments, his two queens, Suniti and Suruchi, they too mounted a palanquin and proceeded along with Prince Uttama. The king, whose heart had been pining for his son for a long time, hurriedly alighted from the car when he saw the boy coming near the garden, and quickly went up to him. Overpowered with affection and heaving deep sighs, he folded in his arms Dhruva, who had been absolved of all his sins and freed of all bondages by the touch of Lord Vishnu's feet. His great ambition having been realized, the king smelt Dhruva's head again and again. This is a Indian, especially an ancient Indian cultural thing, that one of the greatest expressions of affection is to sniff someone's head, like put your nose right up in their hair, and bathed him with his cool tears. Having bowed at his father's feet and received his benedictions, and being kindly spoken to and received with honor by him, Dhruva, the foremost of noble souls, bent his head low to both his mothers. Lifting up the child fallen at her feet, Suruchi, so the stepmother who was cruel to him, pressed it to her bosom, and in a voice choked with tears said, "May you live long." Just as water flows down to a low level of its own accord, so all living beings submit to him who has pleased Sri Hari through virtues like friendliness to all, and so on. Both Uttama and Dhruva experienced a thrill of joy when, overwhelmed with love, they hugged each other and shed a flood of tears again and again. Suniti, Dhruva's mother, was relieved of her agony as she hugged her son, who was dearer to her than life, and felt gratified by the very touch of his body. Milk incessantly flowed, O valiant Vidura, from the breasts of Suniti, the mother of a hero, bathed as they were at that time with her tears of joy. The people of the city felicitated the queen and said, "Luckily enough, your son, who had long been lost, has been recovered and has thus wiped out your agony. He will, in course of time, rule over the terrestrial globe. You have surely adored the Lord, who puts an end to the suffering of the suppliant, and by constantly contemplating on whom the wise have succeeded in conquering death, which is so very difficult to conquer." Placing Dhruva, who was thus being fondly caressed by the people, on a female elephant, along with his brother, the king joyously entered the city. His city is called Barhishmati, acclaimed by all. The city was decorated here and there with plantain trees and young arekas containing bunches set up with charming alligator-shaped festoons tied to them, and was adorned at every entrance with jars full of water with lights burning on them, so like little diyas floating on a water vessel, and leaves of mango trees, pieces of cloth, wreaths of flowers, and strings of pearls hanging about their necks, about the necks of the jars. It was graced on all sides with defensive walls, gates, and mansions decked with gold and with their tops shining like the glorious pinnacles of aerial cars. Its quadrangles, streets, attics, and roads had been cleaned and the city sprinkled with sandal water. Again, it was scattered with fried as well as unfried rice, unbroken rice, meaning rice still in the husk, flowers, fruits, and other offerings. Everywhere the virtuous women of the city showered on Dhruva as they saw him on the road, white mustard seeds, unbroken rice, curds, water, blades of durva grass, flowers, and fruits, uttering their benedictions out of affection, and hearing their sweet strains, Dhruva entered the palace of his father. Fondly caressed by his father, Dhruva lived in that excellent palace built of most precious stones, like a god in heaven. It was furnished with best ivory, as the froth of milk, and provided with coverings of gold, and contained costly seats and other furniture made of gold. In its walls of crystal and emerald shone lights in the shape of bright gems placed in the hands of beautiful female figures carved in precious stones. Within the premises of the palace there were pleasure gardens, charming with different species of celestial trees, resorted to by warbling pairs of birds, and humming bees drunk with honey. It also contained extensive wells with steps of cat's eye, containing white and blue lotuses and water lilies, and inhabited by swarms of swans and ducks, ruddy geese, and cranes. The royal sage Uttanapada was highly amazed to see the most wonderful glory of his son, of which he had already heard from the mouth of Narada. The king made Dhruva the sovereign of the entire globe, when he saw that the prince had not only come of age, but had also won the esteem of the ministers and the devotion of the people. And perceiving himself advanced in age, the king was now disgusted with the pleasures of sense, and departed for the woods, contemplating on the essential character of the self. Thus ends the 9th discourse, entitled The Coronation of Dhruva, in Book 4 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 10. Uttama's death at the hands of the Yakshas and Dhruva's encounter with them. Maitreya continued. Dhruva married Brahmi, daughter of Shishumara, a Prajapati, and the couple were blessed with 2 sons, Kalpa and Vatsara. Through his other wife, Ila, daughter of Vayu, the wind god, to the mighty Dhruva begot a son, Utkala by name, and a daughter, a very jewel among women. Uttama, Dhruva's half-brother, however, who was yet unmarried, was killed in the course of a hunting expedition in the Himalaya mountains by a yaksha who was stronger than he, and his mother, Suruchi, followed him to the abode of Yama, presumably in the manner that was prophesied earlier by Vishnu, saying that while looking for him when he was missing, she would die in a forest fire. Overcome with anger, indignation, and grief at the news of his brother's death, Dhruva mounted his victorious car and marched against the city of Alaka, the abode of the Yakshas. Proceeding in a northerly direction, the king Dhruva saw in a valley of the Himalayas the city of Alaka crowded with the Guhyakas. Guhyakas are here used as a synonym of Yakshas. It's there's some variations within yakshas of different types of spirits, but essentially Gohyakas and yakshas are pretty much synonymous, and inhabited by spirits and ghosts, the attendants of Lord Rudra. The stout-armed Dhruva blew his conch, causing the heavens as well as the quarters to resound, and the women of the Devas, of Vidura, were greatly alarmed at the sound and cast a bewildered look. Impatient at the blast, the mighty and great warriors among the demigods sallied forth from their stronghold with uplifted weapons and proceeded against Dhruva, who was challenging them. As they rushed towards him, O valiant Vidura, Dhruva, the great car warrior who was armed with a fierce bow, hit them all at once with 3 shafts each. With the arrows planted in their brow, they all thought themselves vanquished and applauded that feat of his. Of course, they're supernaturally strong, so they weren't actually killed by it. Intolerant of his valor like serpents who cannot tolerate being trodden on, they, in their anxiety to achieve twice as much as he had done, simultaneously struck him with 6 arrows each. Full of rage and eager to return his volleys, the Yakshas, numbering 130,000, rained on him as well as on his car and charioteer, iron clubs, swords, lances, pikes and axes, javelins, double-edged swords, bhushundis, and arrows with many colored feathers. Screened with a thick volley of weapons, even as a hill is covered with a torrential shower of rain, Dhruva, the son of Uttanapada, could not be seen at that time. That very moment arose a plaintive cry, raised by the Siddhas who had been witnessing the scene from heaven. Drowned in the sea of the Punyajana host, this son of Manu's race has set. Then, in the midst of the roaring of the Rakshasas, so there's a footnote here that I very much agree with. Here, as well as in the subsequent verses, the Yakshas have been referred to sometimes as the Rakshasas or the Asuras, obviously because all these species are somewhat akin to each other, and the population of Alaka was a mixture of all these. Indeed, all throughout the scriptures, the population of Alaka clearly contains lots of Yakshas, lots of Rakshasas, some Asuras, and they were interbred. In the midst of the roaring of the Rakshasas, who were proclaiming their own triumph on the field of battle, Dhruva's car came into view, like the sun from behind a mist. Twanging his celestial bow and inspiring terror into his enemies, Dhruva tore to pieces their host of missiles, even as a blast disperses an army of clouds. Piercing the armor of the Rakshasas, the sharp arrows discharged from his bow disappeared into their bodies as thunderbolts into mountains. Strewn all over with the heads adorned with beautiful earrings, thighs resembling gold palmyras, arms graced with bracelets, as well as with the necklaces, armlets, diadems, and costly turbans of the enemies, who were being mowed down with the shafts of Dhruva, the fields of battle, which ravished the mind of heroes, looked very charming. Hosts of other Rakshasas who had escaped death, yet who had most of their limbs cut off with the arrows of Dhruva, fled from the field of battle like troop leaders of elephants disturbed in their sport by the king of beasts. The king of beasts here being, of course, a poetic way to refer to a lion. That a lion or a group of lions may have panicked a herd of elephants. Not finding then anyone left with a weapon in that extensive field of battle, Dhruva, the foremost of Manu's race, felt inclined to behold the city of his enemies. Yet he refrained from entering it. For he said, no man can know the intention of those skilled in enchantment. Addressing his charioteer as above, Dhruva remained on his guard, apprehending renewed opposition from the enemy, when he heard a loud noise like the roaring of an ocean, and further beheld in every direction the dust raised by a blast. In an instant, the sky was overcast on all sides with a canopy of clouds, accompanied by flashes of lightning and alarming claps of thunder in every direction. They rained torrent of blood, as well as phlegm, pus, ordure, urine, and fat, and before him fell headless trunks from the sky, O sinless Vidura. So this is, of course, the kind of illusory application of Maya and warfare that spirits like the great sorcerers of Alaka can use. Then appeared a mountain in the air, and there rained on all sides maces, iron clubs, swords, and musalas. Musalas are a particular type of arrow, as well as showers accompanied with volleys of stones. Serpents ran up to him, hissing with a thunder-like roar and discharging fire from their eyes in rage, and there came rushing in herds mad elephants, lions, and tigers. Assuming a threatening aspect as at the time of universal dissolution and roaring deeply, the terrible ocean approached on all sides, deluging the earth with waves. By their conjuring tricks peculiar to the demons, the Yakshas, who are noted for their cruel disposition, displayed many such phenomena, which inspired terror into the heart of the pusillanimous. Seeing the conjuring trick, or the illusion, employed by the Yakshas against Dhruva, a trick which was so very difficult to counteract, a number of hermits that had assembled there prayed for his welfare. The hermits said, O son of Uttanapada, may the almighty Lord Vishnu, calling him Sharangadhara, a name of Vishnu, the wielder of the Sharanga bow, who relieves the agony of his suppliants, wipe out your enemies. By uttering and hearing his very name, people easily succeed in this very life in conquering death, which is so hard to overcome, O dear Dhruva. And thus ends the 10th discourse in Book 4 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 11. Swayambhuva Manu intervenes and persuades Dhruva to cease fighting. Maitreya went on. On hearing this prayer of the sages who spoke as above, Dhruva sipped some water and set to his bow the missile that had been evolved by the divine sage Narayana. So he sipped water, performing the Atamaniya as part of invoking the Astra, part of the ritual to invoke the Narayanastra. While the missile was being fixed to the bow, the illusory appearances conjured up by the Guhyakas forthwith vanished in the same way as nescience and its progeny disappear at the dawn of wisdom, O Vidura. So even before loosing this Astra, just the radiance of the Astra dispelled the illusions. Even as he fixed on his bow the missile evolved by the sage Narayana, there flew from it arrows with shafts of gold and feathers resembling the wings of a swan, and penetrated the enemy ranks like peacocks entering a forest with terrible noise. Assailed on the battlefield with those sharp-edged arrows, the Pungajanas, that's another term for yakshas, felt much enraged, and with uplifted weapons darted against Dhruva from all sides, even as serpents would rush at Garuda with their hoods drawn up. As they ran towards him on the field of battle, he tore off with his arrows their arms, thighs, necks, and bellies, and dispatched them to that highest realm, Satyaloka, which recluses attain to, carving their way through the sphere of the sun. So meaning that these yakshas who were fighting here were very high souls, that based on their karma, upon their death, they went through Surya Loka and arrived into Satya Loka. Dhruva's grandfather, Swayambhuva Manu, who was overcome with compassion to see those innocent Guhyakas being killed in large numbers by Dhruva, he arrived along with a number of sages and spoke to the son of Uttanapada, his own grandson. Manu said, "Have done, dear child, with this sinful rage, a gateway to hell, swayed by which you have slain these innocent punyajanas. The carnage of innocent devas which you have embarked upon is not becoming of our race, dear son, for such an act is denounced by the righteous. Indeed, for the fault of one, many have been killed by you because of their connection with the offender, highly perturbed as you were by the death of your brother, whom you loved so dearly, my darling. That one should destroy living beings after the manner of the beasts, taking the body, which is external to the mind, as one's own self. Surely this is not the way of the righteous who are devoted to the Lord. Having adored Srihari, the abode of all living beings, who is so difficult to propitiate, regarding all creatures as your own self, you have secured that supreme realm of Lord Vishnu. Constantly abiding in the thought of Srihari and esteemed even by his devotees, how did you perpetrate this reprehensible act, you who sought to instruct others in the ways of the righteous? It is through forbearance, compassion, friendliness, and even-mindedness towards all living beings that the Lord, the universal spirit, is thoroughly pleased with us. On the Lord being thoroughly pleased, a man is rid of the three modes of Prakriti and of their evolute, the subtle body, and becomes one with the all-blissful Brahman. The male and the female are products of the five gross elements developed in the form of a gross body, and from their copulation spring up other men and women in the world. Thus proceed the creation and preservation, as well as the dissolution from a disturbance in the equilibrium of the three gunas, brought about by the Lord's own Maya, O Raja. As for God, who is ever free from the three gunas, he serves only as an occasion for the transformation of these gunas. It is due to him that this universe, consisting of both cause and effect, remains in a state of flux, even as iron is set in motion by the presence of a magnet. The Lord's energy is divided when the equilibrium of the three gunas gets disturbed under the force of his energy, known by the name of time. That is how he creates this universe, though remaining a non-doer, and dissolves it, even though a non-destroyer. The Lord's energy in the shape of time is indeed hard to conceive. It is the same immortal Lord who, as the time spirit, puts an end to the world, though endless himself, and is the first maker, though himself without beginning. It is he who creates the universe by begetting one individual through another, and dissolves the same by destroying the destroyer himself through death. Equally entering all created beings as death, the Supreme Being treats none as his own or as his enemy. Like particles of dust following a blast, all living beings follow the course of the time spirit, subject to their own destiny. The all-pervading Lord, who ever remains in his own natural state, cuts short as well as prolongs the life of a living being, a creature of its destiny, though himself immune from such changes. Some speak of him as karma, while others call him by the name of nature, the ruler of men. Some refer to him as kala, others as destiny, while still other people give him the appellation of kama. No one, dear son, knows the intention of the Lord, who is neither open to sense perception nor to any other means of cognition, and who is the fountainhead of manifold energies. Who then can know the Lord himself, one's own origin? It is not these yakshas, attendants of Kubera, my child, who slew your brother. It is God alone, dear son, who is responsible for a man's birth and death. It is he who creates this universe, and it is he again who preserves and destroys it. Nevertheless, being free from egotism, he is neither attached to the modes of nature nor to the functions. United with his own energy known by the name of Maya, he evolves, protects, and withdraws into himself living beings, he who is their ruler and protector, nay, their very self. With all your being, dear son, resort to that divinity alone, who is death itself and immortality, who is the ultimate resort of the universe, and to whom the creators of the world bear offerings, even as oxen, controlled by a string passed through their nostrils, bear loads. Cut to the quick by the words of your stepmother, you left your mother when a child of 5, and retiring to the woods, you succeeded in propitiating the Lord by means of your penance and by controlling your senses, and secured an abode higher than the 3 worlds. With your eyes turned inward, seek, dear Dhruva, that supreme spirit, who fondly stays in a mind free from animosity, who is devoid of attributes, one, imperishable, and ever free, and by whose presence this phenomenal world of diversity, though unreal, appears to exist. Then, by practicing supreme devotion to the immortal Lord, who is the inner controller of all selves, who is pure and absolute bliss and is possessed of all powers, you will gradually succeed in breaking asunder the hard knot of ignorance in the shape of I and mine. By dint of your vast learning, O king, curb your anger, which is the greatest impediment to every blessing, even as a disease is controlled with the help of a medicine. May God bless you. A wise man who seeks for himself the state of fearlessness should never allow himself to be overpowered by anger, for people are terribly afraid of the man who is swayed by anger. You have committed a great offense against Kubera, the friend of Lord Shiva, who lives on the mountain, and that you killed these yakshas, though under provocation, thinking that it were they who had killed your brother. Propitiate him soon, my child, through submissiveness and polite words, before the anger of exalted souls like him should destroy our race. Having thus admonished his grandson, Dhruva, and greeted by the latter, Swayambhuva Manu returned to his city, along with the sages. Thus ends the 11th discourse in Book 4 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 12. Kubera confers a boon on Dhruva, who ascends to the abode of Lord Vishnu. Maitreya continued. Having come to know that Dhruva's anger had been appeased and that he had desisted from further bloodshed, the worshipful Kubera, the god of riches, arrived there, glorified by the Charanas, Yakshas, and Kinnaras, and spoke to Dhruva, who stood before him with joined palms. The god of riches said, O Kshatriya prince, I am highly pleased with you, since at the remonstrance of your grandfather you have renounced the feeling of animosity, so difficult to give up, O sinless one. As a matter of fact, it was not you who killed the Yakshas, nor did the Yakshas slay your brother. The time spirit alone is responsible for the birth and death of living beings. Like the dream consciousness, the false notion of I and you arises in man through ignorance and as a result of his self-identification with the body. And it is due to this notion that he has to suffer bondage as well as miseries. Therefore, God bless you, Dhruva. Go and worship for the sake of freedom from birth, the Lord, who is above sense perception and yet manifest in the form of all living beings, whose feet are the only object worth resorting to, who puts an end to birth, and who, though united with his own energy known by the name of Maya and consisting of the 3 gunas, is yet devoid of it, treating all living beings as your own self. Freely and unhesitatingly ask of me, O king, a boon which is foremost in your mind, O son of Uttanapada, you being fit to receive a boon, For we have heard, dear Dhruva, that you are so near the feet of the Lord, who has a lotus sprung from his navel. Maitreya went on. When the great-minded Dhruva, an eminent devotee of the Lord, was egged on by Kubera, the Yaksharaja, to ask for a boon, he sought to be blessed with constant remembrance of Srihari, with the help of which one is easily able to cross the ocean of worldly existence, and which is so difficult to get over. With a glad heart, Kubera, the son of Idavila, conferred on him the boon of constant remembrance of the Lord, and thereafter vanished before his very eyes, and Dhruva too returned to his own capital, Barhishmati. Then he propitiated, through a number of sacrifices attended with liberal fees, the Lord of Sacrifices, who is the reward of ritual acts, performed with the help of material substances, sacrificial activity, and the devas, worshipped in the course of a sacrifice, as well as the dispenser of their fruit. Maintaining an ardent flow of devotion to the immortal Lord, who is the inner controller of all and yet who excludes all, he saw seated in himself, as well as in all other beings, the same all-pervading Lord. The people looked upon him as their own father, him who was thus possessed of a lofty character, devoted to the Brahmana and tender to the afflicted, and who preserved the bounds of propriety. Exhausting his merit through luxuries, and neutralizing evil by practicing self-denial, he ruled over the terrestrial globe for 36,000 years, the lifespan of a deva. Having thus spent a long period as a means to the attainment of the three objects of human pursuit, having spent a long time pursuing dharma, artha, and kama, with his senses fully controlled, the high-souled Dhruva eventually made over the throne to his son Utkala. Regarding this universe, which is no more real than a dream or hallucination caused by ignorance, as superimposed on his own self by Maya, and realizing his own body, wives, progeny, and kinsfolk, as well as his army, rich treasury, gymnasium, delightful pleasure grounds, and the sea-girt terrestrial globe as overtaken by death, he left for Vishala, which later came to be called Badrikasrama, or in modern times, Badrinath. There at Vishala, Dhruva purified his mind by taking a plunge in the sacred waters. And after, since the river Alakananda, the river Alakananda flows through there. And after steadying himself in a squatting posture, controlled his breath through the process of pranayama. Then, having withdrawn his senses with the help of his mind, he fixed it on the gross form of the Lord, and meditating on it till the distinction of subject and object altogether disappeared from his mind, he was lost in samadhi and abandoned the thought even of that cosmic body of the Lord. Maintaining an unceasing flow of devotion towards Lord Srihari, he was bathed in a stream of blissful tears again and again. His heart melted, a thrill ran through all his limbs, and rid of self-identification with the body, he lost consciousness even of his own individuality. While in that state, Dhruva beheld an excellent aerial car descending from the heavens. Like a rising full moon, it shed a bright luster all around as well as above and below. He further saw therein two foremost divinities, swarthy of hue, possessed of 4 arms and eyes resembling a pair of red lotuses, clad in a beautiful attire and adorned with crowns, pearl necklaces, armlets, and charming earrings. They were still in the prime of youth and stood leaning against their maces. Concluding them to be attendants of Lord Vishnu, he sprang on his feet, and forgetting in the flurry of the moment the prescribed course of worship, simply bowed to them with joined palms, uttering the names of the Lord Madhusudana, and thinking them to be his foremost attendants. Sunanda and Nanda, the 2 esteemed attendants of Lord Vishnu, approached Dhruva, whose mind was set on Sri Krishna's feet, and who stood with joined palms, his head bent low in humility, and smilingly they spoke. Sunanda and Nanda said, "O Raja, God bless you. Listen attentively to our words. You who succeeded in propitiating the Lord through tapas while yet a child of 5. We too are attendants of the selfsame Lord. Sharangadhara, the wielder of the famous Sharanga bow, and the sustainer of the whole world, and have called here to take you to the Lord's abode. You have secured the realm of Lord Vishnu, which is exceedingly difficult to attain to, and which even the Saptarishis are unable to reach and only look up to from below. Come with us and take up your abode there. Planets, lunar mansions, and stars, including the sun and the moon, revolve around that realm, placing it on their right. Take up your residence in that supreme abode of Lord Vishnu, which is worthy of adoration for all the worlds, and has never been attained to by your forebears or even others, dear Dhruva. Be pleased to mount, O long-lived one, this excellent aerial car dispatched by the Lord, the foremost among those enjoying the highest renown. Maitreya resumed, on hearing the above words of the two chief servants of Lord Vishnu, words which dropped nectar, Dhruva, a beloved devotee of the Lord, who took wide strides, performed his ablutions, finished his daily routine of devotions, and adorned his person, and having bowed low to the sages who resided at the ashram where he was staying, at Badrikashrama, he drew forth their benediction. Having worshipped and gone round that excellent aerial car, and made obeisance to the two divine attendants, and endowed with a form shining like gold, he felt inclined to mount it. In the meantime, Dhruva, the son of Uttanapada, saw death arrived, and having set his foot on the latter's head, stepped into the wonderful car. So Yamaraja appeared to him and offered his own head as a footstool for Dhruva to use to climb into the chariot, essentially honoring the fact that Dhruva was had transcended the jurisdiction of death and was rising above it. At the moment, kettle drums, as well as drums and tabors, etc., sounded of their own accord. The chief among the Gandharvas loudly sang, and showers of flowers rained. As he was about to soar for the divine realm, Dhruva recalled his mother Suniti and said to himself, shall I have to proceed to the inaccessible heaven, leaving my poor mother behind? Having read his mind, the two foremost divinities showed the shining lady going ahead of Dhruva in another aerial car. Greeted at every stage on the route with showers of flowers by gods shouting applause from their aerial cars, he saw the planets one after another as they went past. Passing beyond the three worlds as well as beyond the Saptarishis by the route of the gods, Dhruva, who had attained the eternal state, eventually reached the abode of Lord Vishnu, lying still further. That realm of Lord Vishnu shines all round by its own splendor. Even the three worlds merely reflect its light. They who are lacking compassion for living beings have never attained to it. They alone reach it, who ceaselessly perform benevolent deeds. They who are calm and collected and look upon others with the same eye, nay, who are pure and complacent to all living beings, and who look upon the devotees of the immortal Lord as their only kinsmen. In other words, who do not feel attachment to their family in a way of identification with, like, these are my people and other people are not. Their only kinsmen are the devotees of the Lord. Only they easily ascend to that abode of the immortal Lord. In this way, Dhruva, son of Uttanapada, who solely depended on Lord Sri Krishna, shone as a gem of the purest ray, serene, forming the crown of the three worlds. Fastened to this realm, the stellar sphere vigilantly revolves round it, O Vidura, descendant of Kuru, even as the oxen revolve round the post in the middle of a threshing floor with great speed, remaining attached to that post. Witnessing his glory, the worshipful sage Narada chanted the following verses in the sacrificial session called by the Prachetas. The Prachetas are some of the oldest Brahman rishis. Playing upon his famous lute, his famous veena, Narada said, even Brahmana sages, though knowing the means, fail to attain the consummation reached as a result of his austere penance by the son of Suniti, who was so devoted to her husband. How then can rulers of men attain to that state? A child of 5 years, he retired to the woods with an aching heart, pierced by the shaft-like words of his stepmother, and doing my bidding, won the Lord, who, though unconquered, is overcome by the virtues of his devotees. Can anyone who is born of Kshatriya parents on this earth aspire to attain on his analogy, even in many successive years, the exalted state won by Dhruva, a state which he attained to, even as a child of 5 or 6 years, in the course of a few days, by propitiating Lord Vishnu? Narada is, of course, kind of exaggerating by saying a few days. It was 6 months, but still amazingly impressive. Maitreya took up the thread again. I have thus told you, Vidura, all that you asked me on this spot about the life story of Dhruva, of exalted renown, a story valued so much by noble souls. Nay, it bestows heavenly bliss and even the eternal state. It is highly commendable and fit to be heard by gods, and wipes out one's sins. By devoutly listening again and again to this story of a favorite devotee of the immortal Lord, devotion to the Lord is sure to be engendered, devotion which cuts at the root of affliction. Virtues like amiability and so on appear in the man who listens to this story. Nay, it is a fountain of greatness for those who seek it, a mine of spiritual glow for those aspiring for it, and a source of honor to the high-minded. With a concentrated mind, one should recite this glorious story of Raja Dhruva of sacred renown, morning and evening before a congregation of the Brahmanas. Devoted to the sacred feet of Lord Hari, he who recites it before an audience of pious souls, on a full moon day, the last day of a dark fortnight, when the sun and the moon dwell together, in other words, the dark moon, or the new moon, the 12th day of either fortnight, of either the waxing or the waning, the day on which the moon passes through the asterism under the name of Sravana, a lunar day which commences after sunrise on a particular day and ends before the next sunrise, a Vyatipata, which is a yoga of Jyotish when the sun and the moon are in the opposite ayana and have the same declination and the sum of their longitudes is 180 degrees, a Sankranti, which is the day on which the sun passes from one sign of the zodiac to another, or any Sunday, seeking no return for his service and remaining satisfied with himself by himself, thereby attains perfection. The gods shower their grace on that tender-hearted benefactor of the afflicted, who imparts to one who has no knowledge of truth this wisdom, which is like nectar on the path leading to God realization. I have narrated to you, O foremost scion of Kuru, this narrative of King Dhruva, whose pious doings are widely known, and who, when he was a mere child, left his playthings as well as the roof of his mother, and resorted for protection to Lord Vishnu. Thus ends the 12th discourse, entitled The Narrative of Dhruva, in Book 4 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 13, Dhruva's Posterity, and the Narrative of King Anga. Sutta continued. Vidura's devotion to the Lord, who is beyond sense perception, was intensified when he heard of Dhruva's ascent to the abode of Lord Vishnu as told by the sage Maitreya, son of Kusharu, and he proceeded to ask the sage further questions. Vidura said, Who were these prachetas, and whose offspring were they, O Maitreya of sacred vow? The prachetas who held the Yajna session, as mentioned in the end of the last discourse. In whose line were they known, and where did they have their sacrificial session? I account Narada as a great devotee of the Lord and as one who has directly perceived the Lord. It is he who taught in Narada's magnum opus, the Pancharatra Agama, the yoga of active devotion in the form of a procedure of worshipping Sri Hari. It is said that, full of devotion, Narada extolled the Lord, who is the deity presiding over sacrifices, while he was being worshipped by the prachetas, who were addicted to their own religious duty. Be pleased, O holy sage, to reproduce in full the stories of the Lord which were narrated on that occasion by the Devarishi Narada, keen as I am to hear them. Maitreya said, When his father retired to the woods, Utkala, Dhruva's eldest son, felt no inclination to accept the imperial fortune and the imperial throne of his father. Cogenitally possessed of a tranquil mind, free from attachment and viewing everything with an equal eye, he, Utkala, saw his own self projected throughout the universe, and the universe as existing in his own self. The impurities lurking in his mind in the form of actions having been burnt by the fire of uninterrupted yoga, he looked upon his soul as no other than the tranquil Brahman, wherein all differences are set at rest forever, and which is one's real self, and hence identical with the joy of consciousness, all blissful and extending everywhere, and no longer perceived anything apart from his own self. Possessing the exterior of a stupid, blind, deaf, dumb, or mad man, in other words, seeming like such a person, but unlike any of these in mind, he was seen on the road by the ignorant like a fire that has ceased to emit flames. Thinking him to be dull and insane, the elders of the royal house, as well as the ministers, made Vatsara, his younger brother and son of Brahmi, Utkala's stepmother, the ruler of the globe and Dhruva's successor. Svarviti, who presides over the Milky Way galaxy, the beloved spouse of Vatsara, the god Vatsara, brought forth 6 sons, Pushparna, Tigmaketu, Isha, Urja, Vasu, and Jaya. Pushparna had 2 wives, Prabha, the goddess of daylight, and Dosha, a goddess of the night. Prata, the god of the morning, Madhyandina, midday, and Sayam, evening, were the sons born of Prabha, the goddess of daylight. Similarly, Pradosha, which is the god of nightfall, Nishita, the god of midnight, and Vyushta, the god of the close of night or the coming dawn, were the 3 sons of Dosha, the goddess of the night. Of these, Vyushta, the god of the end of the night, begot through Pushkarini a son named Sarvateja. So Sarvateja got through his wife, Akuti, a son, Chakshu, who was appointed as Manu in the 6th Manvantara, called the Chakshusha Manvantara after him. The Manu's consort, Nadvala, bore faultless sons, named Puru, Kutsa, Trita, Dyumna, Satyavan, Rata, Vrata, Agnishtoma, Atiratra, Pradyumna, Shibi, and Ulmuka. Ulmuka begot through his wife, Pushkarini, 6 excellent sons, Anga, Sumana, Khyati, Kratu, Angira, and Gaya. Sunita, who was Anga's wife, gave birth to the evil-minded Vena, fed up with whose wickedness that royal sage Anga left his capital for the woods. Angered by him, the sages, angered by Vena, the sages whose words were like a thunderbolt pronounced a curse against him, O dear Vidura. And when, as a result of the curse, they died, when as a result of the curse Vena died, they then churned his right hand. For the world having been left without a ruler then, the people were harassed by robbers. As a result of this churning, there appeared the very first ruler of the earth, Pratu, who embodied a ray of Lord Narayana. Obviously, there were other rulers of the earth before Pratu, but it was Pratu who organized rulership into a modern way in some important ways. This whole story that's being summarized here of Vena and Pratu is going to be told in great length. We won't get to that this week, but coming up in the Bhagavatam. Vidura said, "How did that pious and high-souled monarch, who was a very storehouse of virtue and devoted to the Brahmanas, get a wicked son, on account of which he had to depart full of grief? And for what offense did the sages, who knew what was right, employ a curse against a sovereign who had taken a vow of punishing evildoers? The ruler of the people, even though guilty, should not be treated with disrespect by the people, inasmuch as he wields by his own glory the might of Indra and the other protectors of the world. Narrate to me, your trustful devotee, all the doings of Vena, the son of Sunita, O holy Brahmana, you who are the foremost of those possessing the knowledge of the past as well as of the future." Maitreya said, the royal sage, the Rajarishi Anga, performed a great horse sacrifice, the Ashvamedha Yajna, in which the gods did not appear, even when invoked by the sages. Amazed at this, the priests officiating at the sacrifice now said to the Yajamana, Emperor Anga, "The gods accept not your oblations poured by us. Your offerings, O king, are pure and have been procured with reverence. The Vedic texts, too, are in no way lacking in force, since they are uttered by men who are steadfast of vow. Nor do we know of the least disrespect shown to the gods in this sacrificial performance, due to which the gods, who perceive the doings of all, should not accept their shares." Maitreya continued, "Having the words of the Brahmanas, the Yajamana Anga felt very sad at heart. With their permission, he broke his vow of silence in order to ask the superintending priests the reason of it. The gods refused to come, even though invoked, nor did they accept the cups of soma juice in this sacrifice. Tell me, O leaders of the assembly, what offense I have committed." The leaders of the assembly said, "Not the least sin stands committed by you in this life, O Lord of men. Yet there is one sin perpetrated in a previous existence, on account of which you are issueless here, though possessed of such virtues. With that end in view, endeavor to get a worthy son, O king, and God will bless you. Worshipped with the desire of obtaining a son, the Lord will vouchsafe a son to you. In that case, the denizens of heaven will surely accept their shares, when they find that Sri Hari, the deity presiding over sacrifices, himself is invoked for the sake of a son. Sri Hari bestows whatever boons the devotee seeks. People are rewarded precisely according as the Lord is worshipped by them." Thus resolved, the Brahmanas offered purodasha, which is the kind of ground rice cake, to Lord Vishnu, who resides even in the sacrificial animal as the spirit of sacrifice, in order to secure an offspring to the emperor. From the sacrificial fire there rose a being, adorned with a gold necklace, and clad in spotless white, and bearing in a cup of gold rice, ready boiled in milk with sugar. With the permission of the Brahmanas, the noble-minded king received the boiled rice in the hollow of his palms, and smelling it, joyfully handed it over to his wife. The issueless queen ate that food, which possessed the efficacy of producing a male child, conceived through union with her husband, and when the time came, she brought forth a son. While yet a child, the boy was ardently attached to his mother's father, Mrityu, the god of death, who had sprung from a portion of Adharma, so he turned out to be impious. Taking up his bow and playing the role of a hunter dwelling in the woods, the wicked fellow would kill poor deer, and people would cry out whenever they saw him, "Here is Vena," as if this was a cry of alarm, since he was growing up to be tyrannical. Nay, that most cruel and hard-hearted boy would violently strangle, as so many beasts, children of his own age sporting in the playground. So he was a violent bully. He would beat people up and threaten other kids. Finding his son wicked, the Emperor Anga tried to correct him by various punishments, but when he was unable to tame him, he felt sore depressed in spirits. He said to himself, "Householders who are issueless have surely propitiated the deity, inasmuch as they are saved the agony caused by an undesirable son, which is indeed hard to bear. What wise man would make much of that which, though bearing the name of a son, binds one's soul with the fetter of infatuation, is a source of infamy to the parents, and involves them in great sin, nay, which arouses a feeling of antagonism in all, causes infinite worry, and makes the home a hotbed of affliction? I account a bad son as preferable to a worthy son, who is a source of many sorrows, inasmuch as he strengthens one's attachment to the home. For the former turns a home into a hell, so that a man gets disgusted with it." So he's kind of trying to comfort himself by saying, at least having a bad son helps me be less attached to householder life. Pondering thus and disgusted at heart with his home, which was full of great prosperity, the emperor, who could not get a wink of sleep, got up at dead of night, and unobserved by other men, departed for the woods, leaving the queen fast asleep. The people, as well as the high priest, ministers, and relations of the king and others, were overwhelmed with excessive grief when they came to know that their lord had departed in disgust, and they searched for him all over the globe, even as yogis not knowing the secret of yoga look outside for the supreme person who is within the heart. Finding no trace of the emperor, and balked in their attempt, they returned to the city, and bowing to the sages assembled, told them with tears in their eyes, O Vidura, about the disappearance of their master. let's see. I think that might be a good place to stop. The next story kind of leads through Vena into the Avatarana of Prithu. Prithu was a great avatar of Vishnu, and his story is going to be told at great length coming up. And we're kind of about to lead into it. And we're done with anything about Dhruva and Dhruva's direct descendants. So I think this is kind of a good break place between the two story cycles of Dhruva and of Prithu.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all for coming.
Yes.